Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to 25 Minutes with Cap. Today, we're going to discuss 2022 trends in the reinsurance market, and I'm really excited about the guests we have. First, we have Andrew Newman, president of Gallagher Re. Andrew was previously president of Willis Re and their global head of Casualty. He's a renowned expert in the reinsurance field and brings many decades of experience to this discussion. So thanks, Andrew, for joining. And Todd Burrick, CapSpecialty CEO and Chief Risk Officer. He was previously our head of actuarial, and among other things, drives CapSpecialty's reinsurance buying. Welcome to both of you.
Thank you, Ann.
Sure. So as we go on from here, as you have questions through the session, feel free to enter them into the chat. We'll do our best to answer them. We've already received a few. We'll look to address them in the next 25 minutes. And just as a reminder, the content of this webinar is the property of CapSpecialty and is for informational purposes only. You're not permitted to republish, share, or quote from this webinar without the prior written consent of CapSpecialty, which can be obtained by contacting marketing@capspecialty.com. We hope you enjoy the discussion. So getting right into it. So I think it's an interesting time to check in here because we're now a few weeks after the renewal of the 1/1 treaties, or at least most of them. And certainly, there's some more specific areas to discuss, like silent cyber, communicable disease. But a larger theme to me, and Andrew, I wanted to bring you in on this first, is that certainly there are some products that have broadly been unprofitable for the industry. So how do new markets get capacity in this scenario? Why do reinsurers make decisions to support some but not others? How is a carrier able to achieve placement success in a new line for them when reinsurers are not having overall success in the line?
Great question. And a lot of that happened at 1/1, some startups and some market exits. I think there's probably a misconception that the reinsurance market is full of the Wizard of Oz standing behind screens, pulling levers about, moving capacity on the chessboard. And the reality is, it's a very dynamic financial market, the secondary market that looks at both qualitative and quantitative elements on clients and prospective clients. Your question is really, if you're losing money in a certain class, why would you want to support somebody else getting into that class of business? I think that's the subtext. And I would add another sort of rider to that question, which is if you're taking capacity away from one client, how do you decide who to reallocate it to? And it is a combination of qualitative and quantitative judgments. Are the team experienced? Does the business plan make sense? Do they have a track record of being a consistent cross-cycle player? And you saw it yourself as D&O capacity was exiting the market. You got given some. Why was that? Because the markets obviously believed that you could do something useful and profitable with it. And to the extent they were withdrawing capacity from other people, they took the inverse reaction. And there's no point debating naming names, but that's essentially how that market works.
Todd, anything that you'd like to add there as you've taken a look at these types of scenarios where we're coming out and looking at new products in areas where, because we're in the E&S space, there may be dislocation in that product?
Yeah, I think Andrew's example of D&O was apt. We came into D&O a couple of years ago, and one of the things is we have to make sure that we have the right timing and the right expertise, and that's when we went into the market. We came in with an expert with proven track record, and what was really important for us was the plan we had set in place. So this was our strategy for the different sizes of the different organizations, whether it was the market cap or just the revenue size, and where we were going to attach, and sticking with that plan, showing the reinsurers along the way that we're sticking with the plan and not trying to be number one in market share in year one. Step in, use the strategy, and then continue on with the relationship as we build that portfolio of the new product.
Sure. I mean, so along these lines, much of what you sometimes hear about in the reinsurance market is that it's such a such a technical analysis of the actual experience of the client. How effective can people be? Can clients be? Are there things that clients can do to differentiate themselves besides that? Certainly, we talked about entering a new market, but even when you're already in the market, are there other things that that underwriters and carriers do aside to help them separate themselves from the actuarial study of the business? And Andrew, I don't know if you want to go first on that.
Yeah, happy to. So I sort of amplify, give a bit more detail about the things that the sort of first answer the question. It is just contact. It's contact with reinsurers. It's rolling out your underwriters with reinsurance underwriters, and engaging in a Q&A about what you're going to do and what you're not going to do. And most treaty reinsurers, not necessarily fact reinsurers, but most treaty reinsurers are in the business of guessing and assessing whether or not the people they're backing are the right people to back. They don't actually give their clients a 15-volume playbook that says, you know, if you get 2 7s, you split, and if you get a queen and a 5, you stick. It's much more an assessment of the people, their skills, their capabilities, and their competencies. It's been very hard during COVID, to be honest, when personal engagement has interrupted the ability for reinsurers to meet with their insurance company clients. But there have been lulls during COVID where meetings, functions, presentations, midterm updates, you go away for a day and basically provide a sort of shareholder level briefing on the state of the market, the portfolio. And I think what we're going to see is an acceleration of those engagements, because I think reinsurers have missed them. And I think what they've had to do unwittingly is keep their distance from their clients. And I think all of them are going to be in a hurry to want to reconnect with their clients and to recreate that atmosphere of discussion and debate that used to exist.
But in that case, does that mean then that over the last 2 years, it was that much more challenging to be able?
Yeah, it was a lot more challenging. It was a lot more challenging because, I mean, you know, I don't know whether you agree with this, Adam, but I mean, I think there are certain parts of communicating remotely that have made our industry more efficient. Yeah. But communicating highly nuanced, highly technical, and often very nuanced messages where, to be honest, verbal and non-verbal signaling is all part of the assessment as to, you know, we're human beings. We decide who we're confident with, not just by what they say, but how they say it. I think the market's struggled a bit with its inability to be able to recreate that. And I think reinsurers would tell you that. And I don't know whether they're necessarily in a rush to get on airplanes, but it's harder to do audits. It's harder to meet with and engage with and interact with. And a lot of, you know, the reality is every time a reinsurer meets an insurer, they're going through a review process. They're evaluating. They're reacting to questions and issues and either enhancing their confidence or raising issues that they want to discuss. All of that is pretty difficult to do on a Zoom call. Other video calling technology exists, of course.
No, but it's still not the same. I agree. We always, whenever people ask us to discuss any part of our business further, we love to discuss it in person instead of going back and forth in email. We feel like, you know, that shows, and we like to show our breadth and depth on the products. Sure.
Yeah, we were definitely able to kind of find the times during the past 12 months to get face-to-face, and certainly nothing can replace that. One thing that I did find was a little advantageous, especially during 2020, was we've got a lot of technical experts as our underwriting leads, and sometimes when you set up these meetings with the reinsurers face-to-face, you're not able to bring everybody who really can bring all of the detail. So sometimes we would have these one-on-one reinsurer meetings, and we were able to put more squares on the screen and really get them in front of some of our experts. ideally, it would be great to get everybody with the experts in the room. But that was one thing that I found we were able to take advantage of in the past couple of renewal seasons that we really didn't do beforehand.
Right. But you know what, Adam? In a market that was net reducing capacity, I mean, the reinsurance market was reducing the magnitude of its bets in some of the higher profile casualty classes. To be the beneficiary of new capacity that's reallocated to you against all of these forces that we're talking about it's a good outcome. Anyone who did that should be pleased with themselves.
Right. No, I appreciate that. The one of the next question I had was, with all the media and discussion about social inflation, how much of an impact did that have on the January 1 placements? How much of an impact is it still having? And is there really such a thing? Or are we really just talking about elevated loss trend?
Somebody go?
Yeah, you go. Sure. Go ahead.
So this term sort of began to emerge around H2 2019. And those that know me and read some of the material we put out know that we had a fairly robust response to the use of social inflation as a dynamic that was both, it was presented as new, it was presented as immeasurable, and it was presented as never ending. And we don't buy that. I mean, we've seen what is essentially non-economic loss trend take place in the industry many times, probably 5 or 6 cycles in my 40-year career. We've seen situations where Hobbs and Guiney in certain parts of the United States is just not possible because of non-economic and loss inflation trends. But the notion that it's uncontrollable, that it's new and immeasurable sort of grated with us because we didn't buy into that.
Sure.
I think there is no doubt that there is an increase in jury verdicts. There's objective evidence that says that. There's some theatrical headlines around nuclear verdicts, but you can't argue with the fact that an increase in forecast severity has taken place. You also can't argue with the fact that there are new forces of litigation finance that have possibly changed the game in terms of outcomes. Much more solvent parties viewing litigation as an asset risk. It's more developed in some segments than others. Nor can you argue that some of the sort of socioeconomic forces that have plagued the United States, and I would say large parts of the Western world, have particularly taken their toll in tort systems where juries award damages. That said, your question was, did it play much of a role at 1/1? And the answer is it didn't, because most of the action was taken at 1/1/20 and 1/1/21. And in fact, I think the biggest issue that we face in 2022 is not so much social inflation. It's the extent to which there's been a bit of a dividend in 2021 as a result of COVID, all of which was unprecedented. And what does the world look like in a post-COVID landscape where economic activity increases, vehicle traffic increases, people walking around increases, and in 2022, are we going to see what they call a regression to the mean, a regression to the normal? And I think that was the big debate around loss trends. The technical modeling, I would say, in most instances, wasn't a source of much combat between clients, their brokers, and the markets, as I said, because that was reset in 20 and 21. The debate at 1/1/22 around social inflation was whether or not we're going to pick up what we saw in 19 that seems to have dipped a bit in 20 and 21 in 2022. And I think received wisdom is that we will, by the way. I think beg your pardon?
Oh, I was going to say, well, you used the term dividend. You think people are ahead of the game now. You think they're not. You think people are not trying to continue to keep up.
I think the data seems to suggest, if you look at like US stat data for casualty lines, it seems to suggest that the actual versus expected is lower than you would expect it to be. And I think that's got nothing to do with adequacy of premiums. That's just expected loss. I think there's a view that the effect of COVID on the exposure drivers of general casualty claims has enjoyed a COVID dividend in the way that personal auto insurers had a dividend. I think received wisdom amongst all members of the community, insurers and reinsurers. This isn't a source of debate or conflict. I think the view is that if there was such a thing as a COVID dividend, and it looks like there was, it's a one-off, one-time thing that will regress as the economy, obviously as the forces that created that dividend, reverse and normalize.
Todd, anything that you wanted to add on that part?
I not a lot I can add to Andrew's observations, but yeah, I agree with that. It's and as far as how I saw the reinsurers kind of reacting to what they were seeing around them as far as communicable disease exclusions and any kind of terms, obviously for the 2021 renewal, a lot of unknown, a lot more uncertainty, and there was more activity as far as asking for exclusions, asking for different terms. I didn't see a lot of that in for the 2022 renewal. I think people just being hopefully on the other side of it, kind of saw, especially on the casualty business, what wasn't happening as far as results. Nobody that I saw dropped any of the exclusions or terms that they added in 21, but I didn't see a lot of people looking to expand on that.
One of the other, we talked a little bit, and Andrew, you mentioned 2019, 2020, 21. One of the things that was a real headline there was the D&O market, and really a headline of a rapidly hardening market. Has that market overcorrected, or is the jury still out as to if the business is as profitable now as everyone thinks it is? And I guess, there I'm thinking specifically on public D&O, but if you have thoughts on private D&O, go for it there as well. Andrew, why don't you start?
Okay, so on the basis that I represent clients other than you, of course the reinsurance market overcorrected, and all reinsurance economics should improve for any reinsurer that's listening. Privately, if we pretend there's no reinsurer listening and it's just you and I think the concept of overcorrecting in a class like D&O is a difficult one, because the past is not a very accurate predictor of the future. Despite all of the data science, the analysis, the trending, developing, and on-leveling of historical losses, to the extent the past doesn't necessarily shape the future, it's very hard to know whether you're undercharging and underpricing. And let's go back to the cause of the 19 correction. I mean, it was an entirely own goal. People thought they were making money, and they weren't. They genuinely thought they were making money, but they not only were they not making money, they were losing money. And the problem with the nature of D&O, and particularly public, and particularly excess, and particularly where you've got motions, is you can be a year or two in before you know whether or not you've got a problem or something that's going to disappear. Add in all of the secondary uncertainty around the underlying facts, and you have a very wide range of outcomes. I mean, the reserving corridor for D&O is probably less than 10%, like every year over 30 years. The actual performance amongst the top 20 writers is about 80 gross loss ratio points. So, and let me give you a case study. If you look at, again, public D&O in 2006, if there's anyone on this call old enough to remember that was a class of business that by consensus was to be defended. It was popular. We were coming out of that correction that took place in all liability lines post 9/11, And most people felt that they were sitting on gold mines, right? To be defended, give a bit of rate up, get a bit of growth, and we'll do what we need to do. And along came the GFC. So, and if you had an FI book, you went from loss ratios maybe with a 3 to loss ratios with a 1 and maybe a 2, right, and 3 digits of them. and that had nothing. My point, Adam, is that had nothing to do with rate. And what we've seen in the last 12 months is a rate-driven correction in a marketplace where the rate, the forward-looking view of rate is not easy to ally with the constant changes in threat vectors, because D&O is driven by legislative, judicial, behavioral, social, societal, sort of economic factors that are constantly changing by sector, by region, by client size and type. And if you're looking backwards saying, oh, we got a bit of money in 2020, just like the 2006 going into 2007 analogy, it doesn't indicate underwriting profit in the following year because the losses aren't linear. And there are other lines of business where obviously the connection between premium and loss, like personal auto, large homogeneous groups of units of exposure, much more of a mathematical game, the personal lines game. There is much more of a connection between rate and loss and profitability, and therefore a more explicit assumption around whether or not the market's overcorrected. If we continue to see a reduction in frequency, if we continue to see a stabilization of severity, the answer to that question is probably we might have had. If we don't, then the reverse will be true.
And I think, another line that probably falls neatly under that category is cyber business. So cyber is an area where you are seeing also a lot of price change. Is that enough? Is that a place where hey, 80, 100% rate increases, is that going to be enough to change that business, or do you need to see other type of substantive change? Todd, you've looked at cyber has come to you not only as a as dealing with it as a proactive product, but also as a silent product, and how you have to maybe have a proactive dealing with it, even if it's not specifically written into the policy. Does that make, I guess that's a long way of asking, does the silent cyber, does it make sense to you? Does it make sense to you as something that's of importance? Is it going to just kind of go away? How are you seeing that?
It does make sense to me. I mean, everything's getting connected, right? Everything is electronic. It's on the computers. And with all of the headlines on the affirmative cyber and what we're seeing there, I really like the fact that, the silent cyber is something that I know we're paying a lot of attention to. The reinsurers are paying a lot of attention to. Being in front of it, it's like making sure that we understand what could happen, so we can add and make it non-silent where it needs to be. Do we need sublimits? Do we need exclusions? But recognizing this before something happens, because of what we're seeing on the affirmative side, will it just go away? Probably, but I think it goes away as things become less silent and we really recognize some of the exposure that's there.
I mean, Andrew, are you seeing the cyber market as a rate issue or something else? And I guess that doesn't answer the question of, is anything going to happen? Or is anyone going to do anything about it?
So, our firm probably has 40% of the cyber reinsurance market, and we have a team of 50 who do nothing but cyber under in Newman, same name, no relative, who's done a fantastic job in that space. So it's an area that we think is where the genie is not going back in the bottle. I think moving off the sort of the silent cyber, it's hard to see how digital threat, so cyber as a peril, is anything other than prominent on the risk register as we move from a sort of corporate and commercial lifestyle that was sort of industrial to one that's now digital and post-industrial. And the insurance industry is going to have to find a way of solving for this, or it's going to move further and further apart from those clients for whom physical assets are less important than digital assets. As far as cyber is concerned, it's an interesting phenomenon because I think cyber got an acceleration of fear and anxiety in the reinsurance industry and the insurance industry as a result of COVID. I think COVID was an event that was neither limited in time nor place, where, lots of people in their own, in companies, large companies' own risk management model, they sort of thought, well, if New York goes down, London will be open. If London's shut, then Singapore will be open. And no one contemplated a world where everything's shut. And I think when you look at some of the losses in some really esoteric classes, classes that were not big needle movers in terms of DWP, like 1,000% loss ratios in some of these contingency classes. I think what it did, Adam, is it focused everybody's mind on, oh my God, what could happen from an event that was not limited in time and place. And I think cyber is, at least on the surface, one of those issues.
Sure.
I mean, the people of my generation who can barely find the on switch, go to bed at night worrying about things they don't know anything about. And unfortunately, it's my generation that are running a lot of insurance companies. And I think the reality is that the cyber threat is understated in parts and probably exaggerated in other parts.
Sure.
And it's a highly technical analysis that's required. And I think what you're seeing is an industry that's constipated because it views premium as the proxy for exposure. Premiums are going up. Companies that want to cap their exposure to a couple of $100 million, other than some very, I would say, progressive and enlightened leaders. I think there's a sort of view that says, well, we don't want it to get too big. And then the definition of big is premium weighted. So you have this kind of quirky situation where premiums are going up, sometimes limits are going down, and still the industry can't absorb it. I'm not convinced that's a permanent state of affairs. I think that will unlock and resolve itself for the three reasons I mentioned. I think carriers will face obsolescence if they don't actively try and solve the cyber issues of their customers, profitably solving them. I don't mean just doing stupid, dumb things. I think the rate increases, coupled with the greatly improved underwriting skills that unfortunately the markets had to acquire post-ransomware in building the technologies to actually work out who had good cyber hygiene and who didn't at the point of underwriting, rather than hoping that SMEs weren't going to have any problems. And the rate increases will all combine to unlock this issue that we find ourselves with. Otherwise, I fear what will happen is we'll just move further and further away from our client base. That's my view. But I would pinpoint, funny enough, the biggest impact from COVID was not the communicable disease exclusions. It was the impact on the cyber market. That's a thought anyway.
Sure. Well, hey, we're out of time, and I really appreciate you guys both coming on. Thank you very much.
Great to see you both.
Great.